Jardinico. She is a 15-year-old homeschooler, writer, avid reader, who currently serves as the Children's Ministries and Adventure Director for the FESDAC Church in New Jersey, and is the youngest serving leader of the NJC Conference. Is that amazing? She is passionate about apologetics and committed to speech and debate. Recently, she competed at a national level for the National Christian Forensics and Communications Association and won fourth place in persuasive with her speech, Why You Should Drink More Water. Throughout this entire competition season, from January to June, she has attained 15 winning medals for informative, persuasive, digital presentation, and impromptu speeches. Melody strongly believes in the importance of understanding what you are talking about and knowing what your beliefs are based on. She strives to put into this practice every day. Just this summer, she came from a mission trip in the Philippines where she used the tool of communication to minister to orphans, minority groups, and youth church members. In her free time, Melody loves to cook, play music, read books, and hang out with her friends. So without further ado, let's all give a warm Virginia Beach welcome to Melody Jardinico.
Hello? Oh, can everyone hear me? Yeah, that's good. It's nice to be here. Thank you so much you've all been very nice and welcoming to me. But before I go ahead and start the sermon, are the slides working? Yeah. Oh. Okay, cool. All right. So I want to go ahead and ask you guys, do any of you guys like reality TV? Nobody likes reality TV here? Just me? No? I guess not. Okay. Well, for me, I loved watching reality TV. And one of those shows that I grew up watching is Dance Moms. Have any of you guys heard of this reality TV show before? Yeah. So essentially, what happens in this reality TV show is that they'll have a bunch of these girls, usually from the ages of 8 to 15, and they'll compete every single week at national dance competitions. And it's very intense, it's very rigorous, and pretty much what this show is just very stressful because these people are constantly trying to prove to themselves on why they deserve a place on the team. And one of the main characters of the show was a woman named Abby Lee Miller. She's often used through many jokes through Gen Z, but the reason why she's very important, especially in today's sermon, is because there's this one quote that she would always say, I remember in every single episode. She would go up to the girls and tell them, you know, your spot can be replaced any single time because everybody is replaceable. And I think that that quote is very significant today because that's this view or message that's constantly being perpetuated to our society today. We're told that we're average. We're told that we're replaceable. We're given this view that there's only a certain amount of seats at the table that we constantly need to keep fighting for a spot. For me, as now that I'm a sophomore in high school, I've been using the app TikTok a lot, and one of the things that come up is college recommendations. There's some certain TikTok accounts that give pointers on how to apply to certain colleges, how to boost your portfolio, how to make sure that these Ivy League schools want you and will see you for who you are. And I just remember watching these videos and just being reminded that these schools have such a little acceptance rate. I mean, dozens of kids, thousands of kids apply, and there's only a 5% acceptance rate. And I just remember thinking of that same quote that Abby Lee Miller said, and that's that everybody is replaceable. But of course, as Christians, we all know that this isn't true. I want everyone to take out their hands for a little bit and to look at it in front of them. I remember learning this in, I believe, third grade, and my mom told me that, your fingerprints, that's the only one you have. Even on your 10 set of fingers, none of them is the same. And the same goes for us. Nobody is average, nobody is replaceable, but a lot of the times we tend to believe that we are. And in this sermon, I sort of want to cover this idea of this identity crisis that we're having in today's society. So, with it in mind, let's all please bow our heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, dear Lord, thank you so much for giving me the privilege and the opportunity to speak up here at this wonderful church, dear Lord. Please help us as we're going to be covering the topic of identity and, most importantly, learning to see ourselves how you see us. God, I pray that I will deliver this sermon not with my own words, but with yours. Please give me peace. Please give me the words to properly deliver this message. And in your loving name we pray, amen. Right. Now, in the Bible, we're constantly told about who we are in God's eyes. We're told that we're chosen. We're told that we're a royal priesthood, a holy nation. We're told that we're the salt of this earth and that we were created with God's workmanship. And most importantly, we're told that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. Throughout the Bible, we are constantly reminded of how we look in God's eyes. And I think the reason why God tends to do this a lot, to have this repetition of telling us that we're special and that especially in his eyes, is simply because sometimes we lose sight of who we are. We are constantly reminded by God. I'm sorry, I'm losing track of my notes. But we're constantly reminded by God that we're the salt of this earth, that we're his children. But I think a lot of the times why we're constantly reminded of who we are in God's eyes, because it's really easy to lose sight of who we are in our own eyes. Because how far you go and how much you grow is not just determined by your relationship with God, but also the relationship with yourself. In fact, there's a couple studies done recently on the impact of insecurity and that we have in today's nation. So I just want to go ahead and ask you guys, how many of you guys have an insecurity? I see a couple raise of hands. I know I have a lot of insecurities. In fact, there was a study done by the Children's Hospital, and they had a national poll on teenagers, and they found that 73% of teen girls were mildly insecure, while 69% of teen boys were also insecure. So really, it's just something that everybody has and something that everyone experiences. In fact, by another study done by Contemporary Pediatrics, they found they sort of categorized the different insecurities that people had. They found that 32% were self-conscious about acne or any skin conditions, 31% about their weight, 27% about their hair, 18% about their teeth, 17% about height, and 12% about facial features. So how many of you guys can identify with at least one of these insecurities on screen here? Because I know I definitely have. I probably fit in almost every single one of these categories. So a lot of the times we are constantly reminded how we look in God's eyes, and that's simply because it's easy to lose sight of who we are. But because the devil recognizes just how special and precious we are in God's eyes, he likes to take advantage of that through our insecurities. And I'd like to use the example of Eve. Now, everyone knows who Eve is, right? Yeah, everyone knows. So I'd like to look at Genesis chapter 3. And essentially, what's happening here is that this is the moment where Satan is tempting Eve. He's telling her that you need to eat this fruit so that you can know the difference between good and evil. In fact, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 5, it says, "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." But I want to ask you guys, do you need to eat a fruit to tell the difference between good and evil? No, right? So essentially, what's happening here is that Satan is telling Eve that you're not good enough, you're not smart enough to think for yourself. So you need to take this external thing to make it feel like you're someone else. Essentially, what's happening here is that we're forgetting that we are made in God's image. Genesis 1, verse 27 says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them." You see, God made us special, and he gave us the ability to have a conscience, to see the difference between right and wrong. But what's happening in Genesis 3 is that Satan is making Eve feel insecure, and he's taking her insecurities and forming that into temptation. That's very important because Eve was made like God and in his image. But Satan tried to trick her into thinking that she was less than she already was. He took a hold of her insecurities and he turned that into temptation. And I think that's why identity is very important. The way that you see yourself and the way that you present yourself is very important because the devil can easily take advantage of your insecurities. And I think that's the number one thing that we suffer from. Constantly, we want validation from external sources. We ask ourselves, am I pretty enough? Am I good enough? Do people want to be around me? You know, growing up in Jersey City, I see a lot of people trying to get validation from other places. I know, especially on social media, I find it heartbreaking to see these young girls at the age of 10, 11, or 12, and they're sort of sexually exploiting themselves online. And I don't look at it with a lens of judgment, but I look at it with a lens of empathy because it's heartbreaking to see that even children as young as 10 are constantly trying to look for validation or trying to constantly look for that one person to tell them that you are pretty and that you are special. And I think a lot of the times, because a lot of us are insecure, we tend to not present ourselves in the best way possible. And the other character that I'd like to look at, for example, is Moses. So when you think of Moses, what is one of the first things that pops up in your head? Just go ahead and shout it out. Parting the Red Sea, you know, the burning bush, yes. I think what for me when I hear, yes, that's true. When I hear Moses, the first thing that I think of is good leadership. You know, he led over 40,000 Israelites out of Egypt all on his own. And I just remember that recently I've been studying the book of Exodus. And in Exodus chapter 4, verses 10 through 12, it says, "But Moses pleaded with the Lord. And he said, "O Lord, I'm not very good with words. I have never been, and I'm not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue tied and my words get tangled." Then the Lord asked Moses, "Who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak, hear or do not hear, see or do not see? It is not I, the Lord." So essentially, what's happening here in Exodus chapter 4 is that this is the moment of the burning bush. God comes to Moses specifically and he says that I want you to go back to Egypt and I want you to lead your people out of slavery. But what's happening here is that Moses actually had a stutter. So that means that he wasn't really much of a good public speaker and he had a hard time presenting himself to other people because, truthfully speaking, nobody really wants to listen to a stutter. But what's happening here is that when Moses is saying, "Lord, I'm not good enough, I can't do it alone," and God says, "Exactly. I know you can't do it alone. Who made your mouth? It was me." And as the story goes on, as we all know, Moses was one of the greatest leaders in all of history. He led the people for 40 years. And even though that he had their ups and downs, no matter what was the most important thing is that he still had his faith in God. Despite Moses lacking confidence in the beginning, despite him being a bad public speaker, he was still able to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, but not by his own strength, but of God's. But sometimes our insecurities don't always manifest the way that it did with Moses. It doesn't always appear where we're appearing insecure, where it looks like we lack confidence. But sometimes our insecurities can be used to fuel our pride. And I'd like to look at the example of Saul. Now, does anyone know who Saul is in this audience? Yes? Yes, a lot of people know. That's good, then you guys understand the context. So essentially, who Saul was is that he was someone who was very insecure, just like Moses. In fact, when he was asked to become, I believe, when he was asked to become the king of Israel, in 1 Samuel chapter 10, verses 21 and 22, it says, "And Saul answered, 'Am I not a Benjamite, of the smallest of the tribe of Israel, and my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then do you speak like this to me?'" Essentially, what's happening here is that Saul is saying, "I can't be the king because I'm from the lowest of the low. You can't expect me to lead people if I can't even lead myself." And actually, in the Bible, Saul was described as very handsome and tall, which I think is very important because a lot of the times we don't tend to recognize the beauty and the power that we have in ourselves. But obviously, as Saul started to regain confidence, his insecurities never really went away. And I think that's very important, as we can see in 1 Samuel chapter 13. Now, what's happening here is that Saul is about to lead his people, I believe, into battle. But before they go into battle, there's this practice that they have where the prophet Samuel is going to offer a sacrifice and he's going to pray over the soldiers before they enter into battle. Now, this has happened multiple times. Saul knew what was happening, but Samuel wasn't necessarily, I guess, keeping up with the time. He arrived, I believe, 7 days later, and Saul was kind of getting insecure. He was getting upset. So, what he decided to do was that he took matters into his own hands and he performed the sacrifice and the prayer himself. Now, the reason why this is very important is because Saul was someone who wasn't appointed to be a priest. So, that means that he wasn't supposed to be doing that in the first place. And literally, right after he gave the prayer and after he gave the sacrifice that he wasn't supposed to give, that's when Samuel came. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 11, it says, "And Samuel said, 'What have you done?'" Essentially asking, you know what's supposed to happen. You know the type of practices we do. Why didn't you wait for me? And then it goes on further where Saul responded and he said, "When I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered together at Mishmash." Now, I think that the very important piece here in this verse is that when I saw the people that were scattered from me, you see, Saul's number one insecurity was how other people viewed him. He didn't care about the sacrifice. He didn't care about the proper practices that were supposed to be taking place. His number one concern was always, how are the people going to view me? And if we go further in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 12, it says, "Therefore I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not yet implored the face of Yahweh. So I forced myself and burnt the offering." What's happening here is that Saul is making an excuse to why he acted out of his insecurities. He knows that he did wrong. He knows that he wasn't supposed to do it, but he took his insecurities and he made a justification for what he did. You see, sometimes we make up excuses because we believe that we're not good enough. And usually they can come in two ways. We can make excuses to justify our wrong actions, just like Saul did, or we can make up excuses to not act at all, just like Moses did. Sometimes we say that we're not enough. We say that we're too young, that we're a bad speaker, that we're not pretty enough, or that we're not smart enough. But the truth is that these are all just lies that the devil is telling you so that you're not acting upon the ministry that we were given to do. And I think that there's no better example to sort of illustrate this story of insecurity and pride than my own story. So, this was me when I was 13 years old. This is a time in my life where I was very insecure. I had a very hard time talking to other people. I had a very hard time taking positions in church because I was just overall very insecure. Honestly, I don't really know why I was insecure because I grew up in a home where nobody tells me that I'm ugly. Nobody tells me that I'm not good enough. I think that my parents constantly praised me and told me that I did good. But for some reason, I never really felt that way. I think that it's just in my nature to be someone who's prone to insecurities. But specifically in this time of my life, this was my awkward teenage stage. I didn't really know how to communicate. Dyed hair, you guys get the whole gist. I was still struggling to find out who I was as a person. I remember that there's this one phrase my mom would always tell me, and she would always tell me to speak up, Melody, because I would have this softest voice ever, and I still kind of do. But really, what happened is that whenever people would talk to me, they could barely hear me, that they had to ask me to repeat it like one, two, or three times. And I remember that my sister would also talk down on me because I never learned how to speak up for myself. And this is something that she would tell me every single day, which is to speak up, to stand up for yourself, and don't let other people walk down on you. Yet, despite me hearing that mantra again and again and again, it just never quite stuck in my head because I never had confidence. I thought that if I spoke up, no one would want to listen to me. I thought that if I would try to speak up for myself, it never really went the way that I wanted to. And because I let my insecurities take a hold of me, I had this lie in my head that I was ugly. I had this lie in my head that I didn't mean anything. And that overall just led me to, I guess, stop trying in life. This was a portion in my life where I did want to kill myself. I think I was about 13. I kind of stopped trying in school. My grades were dropping. My presence in church wasn't really a thing anymore. And though I still did pray every single night, it didn't feel genuine. It was something that I just did out of practice. But I remember, I think in the summer of eighth grade, my mother forced me, or like how she likes to say, heavily encouraged me to join a speech and debate club. So, for those of you who don't know what speech and debate is, it's just pretty much just public speaking. That's what you're supposed to do. We do this competitively, and we met up for about once a week. And I remember that as I was hearing about this speech and debate club, I sat there in the open house and I was just like, wow, these kids are so confident. They're so amazing. I wish one day that could be me. But even though I still competed in speech and debate, it was still very awkward. This was me in my very first tournament. I was about 13 years old. I cried a lot this tournament. It was very embarrassing. A lot of my speeches weren't necessarily all memorized. A lot of my debates lacked a lot of confidence because I wasn't really sure in what I was doing. But as I grew older, I realized that um, your insecurities are something that's always going to be with you. I think that they just grow out in different ways. And the older that I've gotten, as I've been doing this for the past 3 years, I've been able to do better. I've been able to get better. I've been able to, collect a lot more awards, make it to debate elimination rounds, compete at the national level with all these wonderful children. There's this phrase in the Bible that says, iron sharpens iron. And I think by being transferred into a new community, in which I was able to just grow and flourish and build my confidence, that's what really helped me. But I realized that as I still started to win and as I still started to grow better, instead of my insecurities going away, it just still felt there. I remember a couple months ago, actually, last month in January, it was the award ceremony, and it felt different than most award ceremonies because even though I still placed high, I still felt empty in the end. I said that, I made it to finals in all 5 of my speech categories. I placed top 5 in almost every single thing I did, but I still don't feel happy with myself. And I remember just thinking of Saul, of that man who took his insecurities and he led that into pride. And I remember just reflecting on my past tournaments and asking myself, why do I compete in speech and debate? And I realized that the reason why I was competing was because I wanted to receive that external validation of knowing the fact that I was a quote unquote winner. For me, growing up as a quiet kid, being able to compete in speech and debate, it gave me power to control the room. It gave me power to control my debates, to control my arguments, because I could never do that in my own life. I thought that if I gained a voice by being able to speak publicly, then maybe I would be able to gain that confidence to speak it personally. But the older that I've gotten, I realized that my insecurities never really went away. What I started to do was that I started to look down on other competitors without realizing that I was that competitor before. Sometimes I would go into a debate round thinking, oh, this is going to be an easy one. She's only been doing this for like what, 3 months? This is going to be easy. But I realized that I still never felt happy. I still felt like that 12-year-old girl who was crying in her room because she didn't like the way she looked. I still felt like I was 13 years old, being unable to speak up for myself. And even though I joined speech and debate, my insecurities never went away. Only my outward appearance did. Things like I started learning how to dress better. I started learning how to use makeup. I started learning to quote unquote gain confidence when I spoke in public. But I realized that I still felt the same. I still felt like that 12-year-old girl who didn't know how to speak up for herself. Like I said, your insecurities can turn into pride. I started to act on my own, and my prayers actually also changed. Before I would pray, God, please give me a humble heart as I'm going to be competing. But I realized that my prayers changed into, God, please let me win. And I recognized that even though I was making more friends, even though I was gaining more confidence in being able to speak up for myself, nothing really changed. Um, I had more medals, but that feeling never went away. I started to dress slightly better, but I still felt ugly. I started to wear makeup now, but I still hated how I looked. Because I, like Saul, let my fear of what other people thought of me, I decided to act on my own instead of acting for God. I started to look for fulfillment in other places. For me, looking for that fulfillment was through school and other extracurriculars because I thought that if somebody else told me that I was smart, then maybe that meant that I was. You know, a lot of people told me growing up that you're a really smart kid, but I never felt smart. People tell me that, oh, you're a really good public speaker, but I don't feel like a good public speaker. And I think that's the same thing that's happening today. Um, Sometimes you don't always just look for external validation through extracurriculars. Maybe it could be through other people. Maybe it could be receiving compliments online or receiving compliments from other people. Maybe you need to be constantly told that you are pretty, or you need to constantly be told that you are smart. Sometimes we look for external validation from other people because we haven't healed that connection that we have with ourselves. Going back to what I was saying earlier, is that we shouldn't view others people's insecurities as a way to judge them, but we should view it as a way to be empathetic towards them. It's something that should be treated with sympathy, and it's something that should be treated with love. Because really, insecurities are everywhere. I see it in debate. You know, I look at my friends and I realize that they're just the same as me, even though that they present themselves as these champions, as these great public speakers. At the end of the tournament, they always still tell me, I still don't think I'm good enough. I still don't think I did good enough. I see it in society where we see children trying to search for external validation from other people. They want people to tell them that they're pretty. They want people to tell them that they're smart. And even though they're receiving all these compliments, they still don't feel that way. I see it among parents, where sometimes some people try to live their lives through their children, where they push their children to do more things than they did because they felt like their lives weren't good enough. I even see it in the church. I see some people who push themselves to the brink of burnout for spiritual work without realizing that they have to first connect with God and themselves first. Going to our memory text of today's is found in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, which says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and perfect and pleasing. I want to highlight that part that says, but let God transform you by the way in which you think. Because how much you go and how much you grow is not just determined by the relationship you have with God, but also the way in which you see yourself. It doesn't matter if people tell you that you're smart. It doesn't matter if people tell you that you're pretty. It doesn't matter that people tell you that you're the best person in the world. But the only thing that matters is that God tells you that you are pretty, that you are smart, that you are good enough to serve. But the only way in which we can truly embrace that is by accepting that truth for ourselves. You know, to have real confidence is to understand what you lack. It's normal and human to have doubts, but that's where you're supposed to give the space to God. That's where you're supposed to give Him that room to do His work and to do that work for you. You know, the Bible promises us that He who began a work in you will be faithful to you. Going back to our memory text of today, it says, let God transform you. And I think that's very important because God is the only answer into dealing with our insecurities. The devil himself cannot take away your value. So, what he does is that he ruins how you see yourself when he can't ruin how you see God. But just because you're thinking low of yourself, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're right. And there's this game that I think perfectly illustrates this way that we sometimes fall into our insecurities. How many of you guys have played the game Two Truths and a Lie before? A couple people? All right, I see a couple of people in this room. But for those of you who don't know, how the game works is that you're supposed to give three statements. Two of them are supposed to be true, and one of them are supposed to be false. And the whole premise of the game is really just to figure out which one is the lie and why. So this was a game that I sort of played with myself every single day. For example, I spend too much time on my phone. That's true. My screen time is like 8 hours, which is a very long time. Let's see. I'm not as productive as everyone else. That's also true. because I'm not doing as much as other people are doing, and that also makes me feel bad. Therefore, because these past two premises are true, then I don't matter. And though that last sentence isn't true, a lot of the times we tend to believe that it is. We tend to fall into this lie of insecurity, of thinking that we're less than everyone else, or thinking that we're not as good as everyone else, because we tell these lies to ourselves. We tend to believe these lies because we see no other option. When Jesus said that he is the way, the truth, and the light, it means that he's the only answer into solving these things. It's not that the devil doesn't want to share the truth, but it's simply that he can't. There's a verse in the Bible that I can't quite remember, but it says that the devil is like a lion, hiding, waiting to just pounce on his prey. Sometimes we tend to feed into this lie because we feel like we need to earn our worth in this world. We feel like we're those children on Dance Moms who have to constantly fight to have that validation of saying you are a first place winner. Sometimes we don't realize that the value of something is determined by the one who is willing to pay the price. And the person who is willing to pay the price for us, as we all know, is Jesus Christ. Because when the devil can't ruin your perception of yourself, when the devil can't ruin your perception of God, he ruins how you see yourself. He lies to you and he tells you that you're not good enough to preach. He tells you that you're not pretty enough to serve. And he tells you that you're not special enough to be recognized. But believing these lies often leads to insecurity, that feeling of not being enough, and that feeling of inadequacy. But being confident does not mean shoving these insecurities away or trying to find other ways to fulfill that. But it means acknowledging your faults and you're allowing God to fill in the gaps. To see yourself the way God sees you is the only way that we can get rid of this problem of insecurity. Because unlike the devil, God says, you are good enough to preach and serve. God says that your beauty is so immeasurable. And God tells you that you are fearfully, wonderfully, and beautiful made, and that He knew you before you were even born. You see, the weapon used in our spiritual warfare is not the weapons of this world. God will often put us in seemingly impossible situations, but the reason for that is because when there's victory, there's no one else that we can give that award to but God's. Because the more that you are able to see yourself how God sees you, it will be clearer to see how you should see yourself. Therefore, it will be clearer to see who you are meant to be. But a lot of the times we tend to get stuck in the first stage, consumed by what we can't control, consumed by the lies of our insecurities, that oftentimes we get confused on who we are. But the only way to be free from that is from God, so we can grow in our individuality. And I'd actually like to end by a quote by one of my favorite authors, Dr. Seuss. And he once said that, quote, "Today you are you, that is truer than true. There is no one alive that is youer than you. And don't let anybody, not your relatives, not your schoolmates, not your family, not even yourself, ever tell you otherwise." And with that in mind, I'd like to invite my sister up here so she can please give us our closing song. Father, dear Lord, thank you so much for bringing all of us to come and speak here today. Thank you so much for this wonderful youth Sabbath and for the wonderful praise team. God, I pray that as we learn about this message of identity, really that to have a good identity is to base our uh, character upon you, dear Lord. Please help us that as we learn this message, to see ourselves how you see us. Please help us to not just listen, but to also apply it into our day-to-day lives. Please help everyone in this room as we all still deal with our insecurities and those feelings of inadequacy. But please help us to just have that continual reminder that no matter what, in your eyes, we are special. Dear Lord, please help us as we're going to be continuing with today's service, for those that are going to be going home, and for the wonderful lunch that we're about to have. And in your loving name we pray, amen.